Welcome, welcome, welcome to Storytime with me, Miss Sheila. I hope you're having a wonderful and beautiful day. Today's story is called So Tall Within, and it's Sojourner Truths, A Long Walk Towards Freedom. Let's get into her story. In slavery time, in the 1800s, when hope was a seed waiting to be planted, look at it. Isabel lived in a cellar where the windows never let the sun in and the floorboards never kept the water out. She had 10 or 12 brothers and sisters. She couldn't be sure, since almost all of them were sold as slaves before she was old enough to remember. That would be really sad to be living just in a cellar with no windows and then all your siblings be sold. But Mama Bert, her mother, kept them in memory. Sometimes at night she held Isabel and pointed to the skies over New York State. Those are the same stars, and that is the same moon that look upon your brothers and sisters, she whispered. And Isabel looked at them, at those same stars, that same moon, and dreamed. Hmm. When Isabella was about 9, she was sold for $100, along with a flock of sheep. Wow. Mama Bet held her one last time. They would always remember to look at those same stars and that same moon, even though they would be ever so far away from each other. Every night after that, Isabella kept her eyes wide open. In slavery time, when happiness was a dream never coming true. So you see, like she's like underwater here, and there's a ship on top of the ocean. Isabella was put to work. Now the war begun, she thought. First she worked first she worked for Mr. Neely, and who figured she didn't need shoes in wintertime. 2 years later she worked for Mr. Schooner, who had her carry fish and hoe corn and dig roots and tend herbs and tote gallons of dark molasses. A year and a half after that, she worked for Mr. Dumont, who bragged that Isabel could do a good family's watching in the night and be ready in the morning to go into the field. And she did, night after night, day after day, night after night, day after day, night after night, and day after day. Whoa, that's not nice at all. But sometimes she looked up at those stars and that moon, and she asked God if he thought it was right. No, it's not right at all. In slavery time, when respect fell as often as snow in July, Mr. Dupont ordered Isabel to marry a slave named to marry a slave named Thomas. She had 5 children: James, who died in infancy, Dinah, Peter, Elizabeth, and Sophia. So she was ordered to marry a person and then have babies, so then they can be slaves too. That's not nice at all. At night, under the light of those stars and that moon, she wondered if her children and her children's children would always be slaves too. That would be a really hard thinking, hey? In slavery time, when promises were as thin as old smoke, Mr. Dumont swore that if she would do well, he would free Isabella, and give her a log cabin to live in by the next summer, a year before all the slaves in New York State had to be freed by law. But the summer came, and the summer passed. Oh, thought Isabel, I have felt as if I could not live. So that fall, after the work of the harvest was done, she held baby Sophia close and seized freedom with her own hands. She ran. Along the road, she came to a house of Isaac and Maria Van Wagener, and they welcomed her inside. They promised they would never abandon her. They were there when Mr. Dupont found Isabel. "You've run away from me?" said Mr. Dupont. "No," said Isabella. "I walked away by daylight." "You must go back," he said. Isabel shook her head. "I shall take the child," said Mr. Dupont. But Isaac and Maria kept their promise. They paid Mr. Dupont's price for all the work Isabella might have done before. She was freed by law, and they paid his price for her baby, and Mr. Dupont left. So thankful the other people paid for her so she could be free. Isabella asked Isaac and Maria if they were her new masters. Isaac shook his head. He was master to no one, he said, and now Isabella was slave no more. But in slavery, time, broken promises were like leaves on a tree. Mr. Dupont sold Isabella's 5-year-old son Peter to Mr. Gedney, who sent him down south. Though Isabella could not read or write, she knew that in New York, where they lived, no slave could be sold outside the state's borders. Isabella, on foot and alone, went to the Dupont's house and knocked on the door hard, and when it opened, she said, "I'll have my child." Miss Dupont shook her head. "A fine fuss to make," she said, and closed the door. So Isabella walked to the Kinney house and knocked on the door. "I must have my child." Mrs. Keenly told her that Peter had gone to live with her married daughter, to have enough for everything and to be treated like a gentleman. But Isabella knew this was a lie. "My boy has gone as a slave, and he is too little to go so far from his mother," she said. Mrs. Ginley closed the door. But Isabella thought, "I felt so tall within, I felt as if the power of a nation was within me." Isabella traveled miles and miles across New York to Kingston to tell her story to the grand jury. They saw how tall within she was, and they gave her a letter for the sheriff, demanding that Peter be brought home. She took the letter and walked miles and miles back. Peter was already far away in Alabama. But Mr. Ginley read the letter, and he knew he must obey the court. He went down south to find Peter, while Isabella waited and prayed, "God, help me get my son. If you were in trouble as I am, and I could help you as you can me, think I wouldn't do it?" Bravo! After a few months, Isabella helped Peter again, but the Alabama masters had whipped Peter, and kicked him and beaten him, and he would never really heal. That was slavery. In slavery time, when chains tore families apart, like the wind frays a flag, Isabella still looked up at those stars and that moon and hoped her brothers and sisters saw them too. And they did. A few years after Peter was freed, he and Isabella moved to New York City, where she met a woman named Nancy at Zion's church. When they held hands, Isabella said, "The bony hardness was just like mine." But Nancy passed away. Soon afterwards, she met her sister Sophia, and then her brother Michael, who had been stolen from her long ago. They told her they had another sister in the city, but she had just died, and her name had been Nancy. Then Isabella understood that one of the first people she had met in New York City was her own sister, but she had not known it. What is this slavery, wondered Isabel, that it can do such dreadful things? Perhaps that was the moment Isabella knew she had a journey to make under those stars and that moon. It would be a journey, a sojourn, to tell the truth about slavery, and maybe then slavery would end forever. More than 15 years after she walked away from the Dumont, Isabella changed her name to Sojourner Truth, and she began to walk again. In slavery time, when words seemed weaker than whips, Sojourner Truth left New York City with a bundle of clothing on one arm and a basket of food on the other. She began to speak out against slavery to whoever would listen. Not everyone wanted to hear, but she had the lever of truth. So she spoke. In Massachusetts, she said, "What a beautiful world this would be when we should see everything right side up." In Ohio, she said that she had seen some of her children sold off into slavery, and when I cried out with a mother's grief, none but Jesus heard. In Indiana, she said, "The truth is powerful and will prevail." In slavery time, where tiredness stood at the doorway, Sojourner Truth walked all the way to Washington, D.C. There, she met Abraham Lincoln, the president, and she told him he was the best president who has ever taken the seat. In Michigan, she collected food and clothing for the black regiments of freemen and former slaves fighting in the Civil War to end slavery. In Virginia, she worked with the Freedoms Bureau to teach liberated slaves how to live in freedom. When some people wanted to stop her, she she warned she she warned that if they tried, she would rock the United States like a cradle. Because if I'm glad that she went around to teach them, to help them know like how to live and not have that they didn't need to be slaves anymore. And in Washington, D.C., when a streetcar conductor would not pull up for her, she cried, "I want a ride." You see, she put her hand out. Good for her. So loudly that the carriage traffic around them stopped and she got on. The conductor threatened to throw her off, but she told him that she knew the laws as well as he did. And she stayed on and rode longer than she had planned to make the most of it. Bravo! For years and years, Sojourner Truth walked and told her story and fought for freedom. And when slavery time finally ended, she felt so tall within. In freedom time, when hope kindled a fire in the dark and happiness winked over the horizon, Sojourner Truth told an audience in Massachusetts, "Children, I have come here, like the rest of you, to hear what I have to say." And what she had to say was plenty. She spoke of a woman's right to vote, spoke about making prisons more humane. She asked the government to offer land to former slaves. She spoke against capital punishment. For almost 15 more years, she walked thousands of miles to Philadelphia and to Brooklyn and to Washington, D.C., and to Kansas, Ohio, and Missouri, and Wisconsin and Illinois, and all over Michigan. And everywhere she went, she spoke of freedom. Wow. In freedom time, when respect wanted to show its face and broken promises tried to mend, Sojourner Truth walked to Battle Creek, Michigan, where she lived with her free daughters and free grandchildren. And Sojourner Truth was weary and ready to lay down her lever. In freedom time, when chains broke and words got up to sing, and tiredness, oh tiredness, danced to hallelujah, Sojourner Truth asked herself, what is anybody in the world for? Then she looked up at those same stars, that same moon, and she saw them shining over everyone. Over everyone. Let me read that again. She looked up at those same stars, that same moon, and she saw them shining over everyone. Over everyone. And she knew what she had been in the world for. I had a work to do, she thought. My lost time that I lost being a slave was made up. Because she helped get everybody back to freedom. And then the last pages are her biography. Wow. I hope you so enjoyed this story as much as I did telling it. I so appreciate Sojourner Truth. Until next time with me, Miss Sheila, keep shining your light bright. Bye for now.